When Dakota Johnson walked onto the stage that evening, wearing a pale silver gown that shimmered under the lights, few could have imagined that behind her radiant smile was a decision that would change everything. Cameras flashed, reporters called her name, and she waved gracefully, but in her eyes, there was something quiet, something final. Later that night, during an interview, she said it with calm certainty. "I made my choice." For years, fans had speculated about the unspoken bond between Dakota Johnson and Jamie Dornan, the chemistry that seemed to blur the line between fiction and reality. From the first 50 Shades movie, their connection had felt real. The laughter between takes, the warmth in every glance, the quiet comfort in each other's presence. People called it acting, but those who watched closely knew better. There was something genuine there, fragile, maybe, but undeniable. And yet, life doesn't always reward sincerity. After the franchise ended, their paths diverged. Jamie returned to his private life in Northern Ireland, surrounded by his family, children, and the peace he fiercely protected. Dakota, meanwhile, drifted toward a very different kind of love, the calm, grounded affection of musician Chris Martin. For a long time, Dakota remained caught between two worlds. One belonged to the man who once understood her without words, Jamie, with his quiet humor and the emotional gravity that matched her own. The other was Chris, whose music wrapped around her like a safety net, steady and mature. While the world obsessed over the fantasy of Anastasia and Christian, Dakota had been searching for something real, and in Chris, she finally found it. But the choice was never easy. Insiders close to her revealed that Dakota struggled with guilt, not because of betrayal, but because of memory. She always cared about Jamie, one friend reportedly said. He was part of a chapter she never wanted to erase. But you can't live your whole life inside a story that's already been written. In private, Dakota had once confided that Jamie's presence lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling. There were late-night conversations, shared silences that said more than words ever could, and moments of genuine affection that neither dared to define. But those moments existed in a fragile bubble, one that could never survive the real world of marriages, expectations, and families watching from the sidelines. When Dakota met Chris Martin, she didn't fall into a whirlwind of passion. She walked into a space of calm. Chris offered her what Hollywood never could: stillness. "He lets me breathe," she once told a friend. That kind of peace, after years of noise and speculation, became irresistible. Slowly, the tension faded, replaced by quiet certainty. Still, Jamie's shadow was never far behind. During interviews, journalists would occasionally bring up his name, and Dakota's lips would curve into a faint, bittersweet smile. She never denied their connection, but she never fed the rumors either. Jamie, in his own way, responded with silence, dignified, respectful, but tinged with something unspoken. Then came the turning point. When Dakota was spotted with Chris at an event in Malibu, a ring glinting on her finger, the internet erupted. Headlines screamed engagement rumors, and fans rushed to dissect every detail. But what truly broke through the noise was Dakota's statement days later. "I made my choice. I want to build a future that feels peaceful, not painful." It wasn't just a declaration of love, it was closure. For her, for Chris, and maybe, quietly, for Jamie too. Those words hit Jamie harder than anyone realized. He had always respected Dakota's independence, admired her bravery in a world that constantly tried to define her. But hearing that she had chosen a path that didn't include him, even indirectly, carried a weight he couldn't ignore. Sources close to him mentioned that he read the quote several times before responding simply, "Good for her." The world saw Dakota and Chris smiling, holding hands, planning a future that seemed untouched by the chaos of fame. But somewhere across the ocean, Jamie was reflecting on what might have been. The man who once played her lover on screen now had to accept that their story, real or imagined, had reached its final page. Dakota's decision wasn't born from rejection or regret. It came from growth. She had spent years learning that love isn't about intensity, but balance. She had lived through passion that burned bright and fast, and she had learned the beauty of something steady. Choosing Chris Martin wasn't just about love, it was about finally choosing herself. And so, behind the glitz of Hollywood and the perfection of her public image, Dakota Johnson closed one chapter and began another. Her words, "I made my choice," weren't meant to hurt anyone. They were simply the truth of a woman who had learned to let go of what was beautiful, but impossible. For Jamie Dornan, that truth echoed in silence. For Dakota Johnson, it sounded like freedom. When Dakota Johnson uttered those 4 words, "I made my choice," the world moved on quickly, but Jamie Dornan didn't. He had always admired her courage, her ability to speak her truth without fear. Yet, hearing her confirm a future that no longer had a place for him felt like the final closing of a door he never fully wanted to shut. Publicly, he smiled. In interviews, he congratulated Dakota and Chris Martin with the same calm composure that had always defined him. But those who knew Jamie well, the few friends who saw behind his polished exterior, noticed the silence that followed. He didn't talk about Dakota anymore. He avoided interviews that mentioned 50 Shades. And when fans brought up their undeniable chemistry, he would respond with a soft laugh and a distant look, as if remembering something he could never say aloud. For years, the connection between Jamie and Dakota had been Hollywood's favorite mystery. Was it real, or was it simply good acting? The truth, as those close to them whispered, was somewhere in between. They had shared something genuine, a rare understanding that didn't need words. But reality was cruelly practical. Jamie had a family, responsibilities, and a reputation to protect. Dakota had dreams that led her toward freedom, not confinement. The timing, the circumstances, everything was wrong, even when their hearts wanted to believe otherwise. After Dakota's declaration, Jamie threw himself into work. New films, long shoots, endless press tours, anything to keep his mind occupied. Yet every time he stepped onto a red carpet, the flash of cameras reminded him of her. There were moments when he'd catch a glimpse of Dakota in a headline or see a clip of her laughing beside Chris, and something in him would tighten. Not jealousy, exactly, but an ache. The kind of ache that comes from knowing you once held something rare and let it slip away. Dakota, too, seemed to carry her share of quiet reflection. Though she was glowing in her relationship, fans noticed how often she spoke about the complexity of human connection in interviews. When asked about love, she answered with a maturity that sounded earned through heartbreak. Sometimes, she said softly, the bravest thing you can do is choose peace over passion. It wasn't directed at anyone, but those words echoed like an invisible thread between her and Jamie. Jamie, on the other hand, had always believed in loyalty, to his family, his values, his sense of right and wrong. But even loyalty can feel like a cage when weighed against what might have been. There were rumors that he reached out to Dakota after her public statement, not to rekindle anything, but to say goodbye properly. No one knows what was said, but the two were never seen together again. The silence between them became its own story. Hollywood moved on to newer headlines, but the emotional residue of their story lingered. Fans replayed interviews, old behind-the-scenes clips, slow-motion glances. They dissected every touch, every smile, searching for meaning in the spaces between. And maybe that's the tragedy. Everyone saw it, everyone felt it, but the two people at the center of it could never live it out loud. One of Jamie's closest friends once described it perfectly. It wasn't that they fell out of love. It's that life didn't give them the right shape to fit together. That's the quiet cruelty of adulthood, realizing love isn't always enough. Months later, when Dakota and Chris Martin's engagement became official, Jamie was filming abroad. He didn't issue a public comment. But during a press conference, when a journalist asked about past connections that shaped you, he paused for a long time before answering. Every person who's ever mattered to me still matters, just in different ways. That was all he said. Yet, those who listened carefully could hear the weight beneath his words. In the months that followed, both their lives seemed to settle. Dakota began appearing beside Chris at events, her happiness quiet but unmistakable. Jamie, meanwhile, became more reflective, more private. He poured his energy into his roles and his family, often saying he was grateful for the stability his life now offered. But sometimes, in the stillness between scenes, he'd look away as if hearing an echo from another time. A laugh, a memory, a name. And perhaps that's how love truly ends, not with anger or regret, but with a quiet acceptance that some stories aren't meant to have sequels. Dakota had chosen peace, and Jamie had chosen silence. In their own ways, both had honored what they once shared. Still, every time Dakota's name appeared in an interview or a song by Coldplay played on the radio, Jamie couldn't help but think of the woman who once looked at him the way no one else ever had. He didn't wish things were different anymore, he just wished he had said more while there was still time. Because love, no matter how deeply felt, can only survive where it's free to exist. Dakota found her freedom beside Chris Martin. Jamie found his peace in letting her go. And somewhere between her words, "I made my choice," and his silence, lies a truth both beautiful and devastating. Sometimes the greatest act of love is to accept that you weren't the one chosen.